Hello there, and welcome to today's virtual program, The Impact of Automation on Cybersecurity, the Good, the Bad, and the Human. I'm Riley O'Brien, VP of Events and Experiences, and I'm joined today by Ruthie Ditzler, TAO's Marketing and Regional Program Coordinator, who'll be helping out on the back end of our Zoom today. A couple of rules of engagement before we start. All participants have been muted, and we ask you to remain on mute unless a staff member or Corey, our presenter, asks you to talk. You can respond and ask questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to myself or to Ruthie under the special events name. We'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. And then you're also invited to engage via the participant icons on your screen, give a thumbs up, ask him to slow down if he's going too fast, and engage in that way. We also invite you to join us on social media throughout the call and during the day. We'd love to share what's going on with TAO and get participant takeaways from our events. A huge thank you to Avertium for underwriting this conversation. We appreciate their continued support of TAO. They've been a longtime supporter of our Lunch and Learn program, and we're excited to have them joining us virtually. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this session, Managing Consultant with Avertium, Corey McReynolds. So Corey, the mic is yours.
Hello, everybody, and I'm sure there are probably a few familiar faces and things out there. So I'm sure that I've spoken a number of times. So hopefully we've got some long-time viewers. But as we get ready to get rolling through this presentation, please feel free to chime in and ask any questions. Those of you who have experienced presentations from me before know that you can always chime in with a question, and I'm more than happy to explain things or dig in as needed as we go through everything. Am I good to go ahead and start sharing my screen?
You're good to go.
Excellent.
Couldn't get to that thumbs up fast enough.
No worries. All right. Okay, can everyone see that all right?
Yep, it looks good.
Excellent. All right, let me bring up try to bring up my chat here. There we go. It disappeared when I started sharing. All right, so this is going to be a discussion on essentially on automation in cybersecurity. So talking about kind of machine learning, artificial intelligence, neural networking, all of these wonderful, super fancy technological terms that we hear a lot about that are kind of invading all facets of not just security, but of our lives in general, but with a particular focus in a lot of the security tools and things that we currently utilize. All right, so a quick agenda. So I'm gonna give you all just a very quick introduction to myself. Like I said, hopefully, I think there are probably a few of you. I saw some familiar names out there that have met me before. We're going to cover the learning objectives, and that's going to cover the subsequent portions of the presentation. So we're going to look at some scary numbers, and then we're going to figure out some ways to answer those scary numbers. And then we're going to talk, like I said, a little bit about artificial intelligence and the role that it plays currently, and then kind of how to balance that out into a holistic approach to security. So for those of you that don't know me, I've got a very interesting and varied, colorful background. But I spent a number of years as active duty in the U.S. Army. Ended up as a military intelligence officer. Please don't hold that against me. Then after I departed the Army, I worked with the DOE on some various projects, dealing with system security plans and compliance and physical security, personnel security, all that wonderful good stuff. Then I picked up a position working for the VA's thrift savings plan for veterans, working with SAIC actually on a number of processes and things that supported that program. And then I realized that I kind of enjoyed working with smaller organizations, and I've always been passionate about startups and kind of lean business practices. So I jumped into startups and worked with a data storage company that built a bunch of data centers that were storing data in the double petabyte range. Coming up with solutions for them, architecting the facilities from one end to the other, all of the software and solutions that were utilized, all of that good stuff. And then I got really what is my dream job, which is with what is now Avertium and was at the time Sword and Shield, working with their enterprise solutions team, which is kind of the jack of all trades. In fact, basically anything outside of healthcare and PCI, my team handles. So I love the variety. I love the constant change and the constant challenge, the constant exposure to different facets of security. All right, so our learning objectives. So there's going to be 4 big areas that I want to focus on. The first is talking about the risks that are associated with people, right, with human beings. Obviously there's kind of there's a divergent set of thoughts when it comes to people either looking at them as risk or as potential helpers when it comes to security. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to step into how automation is being used to combat some of the threats that are associated with, having people around in environments and having people who have access to things and that can do things, do privileged things. And then from there, we'll step into the probably the most dynamic way automation can be utilized within security, and not making some errors and making some assumptions, with its capabilities within the realm of how we approach security. And then that'll lead us cleanly, hopefully, into a classic holistic approach to security, which, like I said, anybody who's on here who's heard me speak before, I probably beat it into the ground repeatedly, but it's something that I feel very passionate about, is taking, once again, taking that holistic approach to security. There's not one single angle, there's not one single direction that you have to approach it from. You really have to take a look at the big picture and all of the different facets of security. Now, as we, like I said before, as I begin stepping through these, please feel free to jump in with any questions. If you need a minute to actually type out your question or whatever the case may be, just throw something into the message board. I am watching it closely, and I do really, really enjoy having interaction with everybody. So like I said, if you disagree with me, fantastic, bring it up. I'm more than happy to have a discussion about it. If there's different elements that maybe you don't understand or that are new to you and you want me to kind of dig in or explain, or possibly get rid of some of the jargon that I usually try to avoid, please, by all means, just let me know, and I'm more than happy to dig into some things further. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is it's not the pretty part. It's kind of the scary part for key business owners. It's it's the part of security that I think keeps a lot of security professionals, a lot of, like, say, key business owners, leadership and stuff, IT folks. It keeps us up at night. Dealing with, or the worry associated with, potential threats and things out there. So these are some of the scary numbers to kind of throw out. And for those of you who don't know, there is a fantastic, and this is where these numbers are pulled from. There is a fantastic study that is conducted every year by well, it's actually conducted by the Poneman Institute, but it is funded by IBM, that they do, that basically does a huge collection of data breach information from around the world. And businesses is a very business sector, businesses of all sides, every country, just all kinds of really fantastic information. And it serves lots and lots of good purposes, besides giving me some fantastic numbers to throw up on this slide here. It can also provide some really good backup if you're trying to rationalize a spend or a budget on security or security awareness training or things of that nature, it really lends a lot of weight to the reality of data breaches and just how much damage they can do. And as you can see here, this past year, well, as of 2019, they haven't completed the 2020 study yet, of course, as we're still kind of in this year. But as of 2019, the average cost worldwide was just shy of $4 million, and that's per one breach. And I usually open it up, with the fact that an average cost of per record is $150, which doesn't sound like a lot until you see that number below it, and you realize that the average number of records that get stolen in a breach is, just over 25,000 records. And really, for me, what I always find the most interesting out of all these numbers here is really the 279, right? The average number of days to identify and contain a data breach. That is crazy. I mean, we're talking, nearly a year at that point, to try and identify where a breach has come from and where the data is leaking from. We engage with a lot of organizations that have been hit either with malware, ransomware, or have an active threat inside of the environment. And, obviously, depending on how aggressive an attack is, it can take weeks or sometimes months to really fully combat that. But it's mind blowing to me that the average number of days that a lot of organizations deal with worldwide is that long. You can just fathom putting yourself in their shoes, dealing with and here we're talking about monetary value, right? Only. But think about the cost of your company image, and kind of how that plays up, and the loss of faith or trust in clients and customers. And you think about dealing with that for that extended period of time. That can be a huge loss. Plus what it does to a company culture, especially depending on the size of an organization. A lot of folks, they'll see the writing on the wall, and they'll your talent can jump ship. There's all kinds of things that can snowball, related to a data breach. But as we can see, I mean, there's really, there's definitely a lot of weight that needs to be lent to this as a threat. And if you want to see something really scary, this is what I find so incredible is how much the cost and the impact has grown over the years. So here, just in the United States, right, we can see that there's been 130% increase, in the cost of a data breach. I mean, that's absolutely crazy how exponential these increases have been, and it's because the attacks are getting more advanced. We become more dependent on technology. Our architectures are more distributed. There's lots of reasons that play into this, but the fact of the matter is that we have a shifting culture. We have a shifting environment. And the attackers are obviously becoming more effective and more aggressive with the tactics that they utilize to try and get data from various organizations. So, when we start thinking about this and about the data breaches, the obvious question is, well, what leads to those data breaches, right? What causes, what types of attacks can impact or are the cause of this mass loss of data and this cost these organizations. Obviously, we have malware, right? So there's lots of stuff that gets placed into, and there's different types of malware that can be utilized, right? Anything from stuff that utilizes resources to pieces of malware that go into an organization that will grant access to an attacker, and even grant persistent access, really. And that's really where we see the most damage, is those persistent threats. And that high number, that 279 days, that's really where that is coming from. So a lot of organizations don't necessarily realize this. A lot of times we think that an attacker, or a piece of malware gets into our environment and they instantly jump in and attack us, and either steal data, or they encrypt everything and threaten with a ransom. And that's usually kind of the concept that most of us have. But in reality, what we have found, and once again speaking from experience, and this is very common, is that an attacker who's able to gain access to an environment, whether through malware or through other means that we'll discuss here momentarily, more times than not, they will typically sit in that environment from anywhere from 2 to 6 months, not doing anything that's going to draw attention, not do anything that is going to look obvious to anybody who's tracking or monitoring things. They will sit, they will watch the environment, they will try and passively collect information. They will get a sense of kind of what the architecture looks like. If they can grab credentials, they will certainly do that. But most importantly is they begin laying their traps. They begin laying the elements that are going to allow them to be a persistent threat. So, for instance, if they create, an account that that might get cut off, they might have other accounts that automatically get created, because of that, or they might have logic bombs that get set off to cause damage that allows them to get back in. There's all different types of tactics that they will employ to ensure that they have a continued and persistent access to that environment. So we all know phishing. Phishing is, interestingly enough, it's almost becoming the least aggressive and the least scary form of attacks and gaining information, right? The blanket ones that aren't directed at a specific person, right? That maybe offer, say that there's a problem with accessing your account, or maybe they're offering a gift card, or maybe there's some sort of return, that kind of stuff, which still do catch a lot of people, especially in organizations that don't do a great deal or do very effective training. These can still be very, very effective. But a lot of us now, I think culturally speaking, we are kind of shifting towards, we kind of know what those vague blank emails with some, spelling errors, and, it's not addressed specifically to us, and it's from outside of the organization. And, a lot of us are becoming, I think, more aware of what phishing, emails and phishing attempts look like. But what's really scarier now and becoming much more effective, right, is spearfishing. Now, these are much, much more effective types of attacks, mainly because the attackers do their research ahead of time, right? They send emails to a specific person. They know their name. They know a limited amount of information about the company, about the organization, about what's going on. They might even be familiar with the organizational chart of a company or an organization. They might be familiar with various people, and be able to refer to them by name. So these types of attempts, to collect information or to get credentials, are much, much more highly effective, and do require a much keener eye and a much higher level of awareness to recognize. As they, like I said, they don't, they may not have any spelling errors. They're not, they're not sent to a generic group of people or across an organization. They're highly targeted, a lot of times towards people in finance, or people that are going to be outside the realm of IT and security, but usually have some sort of escalated privilege or access. So these are very, very effective, and these are the ones that are still catching a lot of people today. And the reason why phishing in general is still considered to be one of the most common and effective types of compromise within our organizations. So what do all of these have in common? Social engineering. And that's really what it boils down to is, we're becoming very effective with traditional security tools and traditional types of things, with everything from email gateways, to monitoring, to endpoint protection. There's a lot of different things that we've done that have made us much more effective at being able to track or identify, viruses and things of this nature that might get implanted, or malicious websites and things of that nature. So, from a technical standpoint, we've gotten a lot better at being able to determine those types of attacks. But where we're still very, very susceptible, and where a lot of threat actors know that we are still very susceptible, right, is from the social engineering aspect. They know that people are people, right? We're not machines. We don't have a set of algorithms that we are utilizing to determine whether or not somebody is legitimately who they say they are. They know that we're fallible, that we can get busy, that we can get caught up in things from the day-to-day grind, and if we don't carefully look at something twice, that they know that they can take advantage of that. That's the reason why a lot of times, when you see cybersecurity incidents or attacks, they typically happen late on a Friday. In fact, at Avertium, when I'm telling because my team deals with a lot of our incident response, just like this past weekend, because we knew it was a holiday weekend, everybody's like, cross your fingers and hope we don't get any calls on Friday, right? Because that's usually the motion, right? It's like, especially Fridays before holiday weekends and things of that nature, that attackers really love to take advantage of those moments when people are rushing and they just want to get home and they want to start their long weekend. They know, once again, that we're fallible, and they will take advantage of those moments, and they're keenly aware of if they are highly targeted enough to know your name and to know who you work for and where the organization is and people within the organization. I guarantee you they know where the headquarters is and what time zones are operated in, and they know very, very much, very keenly, when the optimal times are to reach out and attempt these types of things against organizations. So how do we answer these threats, right? It's kind of big, it's kind of scary, and we're talking about human fallacy, and we're talking about things that maybe can or can't necessarily be be combated just with a security tool or an antivirus, right? Or a firewall. It's not quite as simple as that, correct? So, do we go to the extreme? All right, we go the militant route. Do we completely rely on full automation, right? Or do we just assume that that things are going to be kind of we're going to use some kind soft tools, as it were, to just to generally check things, and just assume trust unless that trust is broken. And I would argue that every single one of these, there are going to be issues, right? You're either going to sacrifice productivity for high security, or you're going to rely so much on a piece of technology that it's going to operate in spite of you, and in spite of anything that that your organization might need if an emergency occurs, or if there's a change in pace for whatever reason. And even if it doesn't provide a complete block, perhaps it just makes steering the ship a little bit unwieldy, right? That you maybe taking it is like trying to turn a tanker or something like that. That it's going to be a very slow and monotonous process. And anybody who and to kind of drive that point home, anybody here who has worked in an organization, or anybody who's ever had like McAfee on their their computer or their laptop knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? McAfee was notorious for being able to be nigh impossible to be removed from a system for a long period of time. And that's not what we want either, right? We want the technology to work for us. We want it to be flexible enough to do what we need it to do, but not to deter or throw off the rails our production capabilities or the services that we're offering to our customers. But by that same token, right, we can't be too soft on it either. We can't just assume that doing some basic technology scans, vulnerability scans, firewalls and endpoint protection, that's gonna fly anymore and actually provide any kind of adequate protection. So how do we bring in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and neural networking? How do we bring them in to really help what it is we're doing nowadays? And there is a whole plethora of places that this technology is currently helping that you may not even be aware of, and is really on kind of the verge of being the cutting edge of technology around the corner that can really propel us into the future. So with anti-malware, so machine learning can do things that a human being can't. I don't know about any of you all, and if there are any database administrators out there, I don't mean anything cruel by this, but it would drive me insane to try and look at database information and run tons and tons of queries to try and get enough information to analyze, whether a piece of malware is affecting a database. That just seems, I mean, as much data as can be stored in our very complex databases nowadays. I mean, it's a sheer amount of information that is just incredible. And so machine learning can utilize that much more efficiently than we as humans really can. So machine learning can build databases of malware and what are commonly referred to as indicators of compromise, or IOCs. And some of you may have heard or not heard of that terminology, but essentially what that means is those are kind of, for lack of better phrasing, markers that maybe something might not be right inside of a system, or that something is behaving oddly. And those markers in certain combinations are known and associated with specific pieces of malware and other types of attacks. And so machine learning can essentially, build out these massive collections and databases of data on how attacks have been carried out, on the effects of systems and things of that nature, and create signatures that it knows for anything that's been previously used. Right. This is on a very simple note. And this is kind of like traditionally what we would see with an antivirus. Right. You would have an antivirus update, and it would update your definitions. And while that old kind of antiquated approach to updating definitions of what is and is not malware or virus or ransomware, whatever the case may be, this is much more highly advanced, right? Because we're talking about huge varieties and types of information and indicators that can be correlated to create these signatures from various pieces of malware. And they can be very very good, more specifically about catching, and this is really where an algorithm might fall short, is catching variance, right? So whereas an algorithm might say, well, hey, if we see A, B, C, and D, then we know it's this type of malware, this type of virus. But if we change something, if we remove A and add an E, or whatever the case may be, or we just slightly tweak it, algorithms can quickly become obsolete. Whereas machine learning can look at that, and it looks at it from almost like a percentage type of vantage point, where it goes, okay, well, this is not 100% matching our indicators of compromise for this specific piece of malware, but it's a 90% match, or it's an 80% match. And that allows us, one, to create thresholds, right, for what we deem to be something to be concerned about or not. So we can tell that machine, hey, if you see anything that's a 60% or greater match, then we want you to alert us, or we want you to quarantine it anyway. And so that gives us a much greater granular level of control over being able to identify variants and deal with them in the same way. Whereas kind of like I said, old school antivirus and stuff like that, it's on a set definition, it's on a set list. Maybe it's IPs, or maybe it's a specific type of file that gets left. So machine learning is not limited to just those few variables. It's got a much wider breadth of capability. All right. So this is really one of my favorites, and this is the ability to automate and orchestrate defense mechanisms. So we as human beings obviously need sleep, we need food, we need to take bathroom breaks. There are lots of things that we need. So it becomes much more difficult to stay attached to a screen staring at something 24/7. And even if you're not talking about a singular person or a few people, right? Well, then you have to talk about, well, hey, can my organization afford a team of people that can watch or monitor things across the clock 24/7? Oh, and can they do it across multiple locations? Oh, and can they do it across multiple domains? So it can become very complex very quickly for human beings to try and to deal with this type of stuff. I actually ran into, a few years ago, we had an organization that had got hit with ransomware for the first time in their history, and they've been around since the 70s. And when I was interviewing their technical staff, I was talking to their IT director, and I basically got him to describe to me kind of what their defenses were. And he was like, well, I have some Linux machines set up with IP tables, and I just check the logs. And so I was like, what do you mean you check the logs? He's like, yeah, I pull the logs out and I look at all of the events. So I don't know about you all, or or for those of you who maybe don't have a sense of how many events get generated from a single machine, let alone an entire network. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of millions of events that can be produced within minutes or hours from a network. And the thought of a human being trying to manually look at all of those events and figure out and correlate that information, and to figure out where an attack may be occurring, it's just insane. It's not even in the realm of possibility anymore. And so, this is where relying on some artificial intelligence-based tools can really, really be incredible. We can set them up with specific thresholds to say, hey, we want you to either alert us that something may be happening, or maybe we want to be more aggressive. We want you to automatically quarantine or lock off whatever this is, or we want to set up various levels of rule sets, right? So if you see this type of attack potentially, or this type of malware potentially, or whatever, then you're going to take this action. And these are all things that allow us to do a lot more with a lot fewer people. It allows, what 10, 15 years ago, what would take an entire SOC or security operations center, right? Or sometimes organizations will even double up their network operations center, of 10, 20 people to do all of this active monitoring. Now you can do it with just a handful of people, or just a couple of people that are able to get multiple feeds from these AI driven SIM tools and stuff that are automated and orchestrated to filter out a lot of false positives and things of that nature, or informational events, or whatever the case may be. I mean, there's really no end to the capability it has in being able to trim down and make us very efficient at what we're doing. And the next part is really kind of this is kind of a keyword or a hit phrase right now that's very in the public eye, and we hear a lot about, which is behavioral analysis. And really this is something that a human is really almost incapable of doing on their own, just because of the sheer amount of information involved in order to be able to accurately do it. But it does rely on some basic kind of old school, if you will, detective concepts, and that is understanding what is or is not aberrant behavior, looking at what normally happens inside of a network, and being able to identify when something is out of place, or when something maybe begins to move data that that shouldn't, or maybe somebody from a certain position in the company starts poking around in areas they don't normally poke around in. These AI-driven algorithms can do an incredible amount of correlation, and that's really the key portion there, is the correlation. So it can look at maybe geolocation of where a user is at versus where they're normally at, the areas that they normally access, the hours of day that they normally operate, the types of data that they normally move around, even the number of emails that they normally send, and how much screen time they spend. I mean, it's crazy how detailed and granular these analytics can get on what behavior looks like within an organization, and it can correlate that from multiple parts. So it can look at multiple user accounts. It can look at multiple actions within the network. It can look at things that have been allowed or have passed through the firewalls. It can look at your access control systems and Active Directory like that, and being able to utilize all of that correlation of all of that data and information to be able to grant, or to be able to access or focus in on the behavioral analysis of what a user is supposed to be. So I just had a question pop in here from Clark, and he's asking, how is this different than machine driven SIMs? That's actually exactly what I'm talking about, Clark, is machine learning driven SIMs. That's what this is a description of. And SIMs, coincidentally
Thanks,
enough,
sir.
yeah, SIMs are
Appreciate
actually
it. Sorry about that. Yeah.
no worries.
Go ahead.
They're actually, coincidentally enough, they're one of the probably the most common types of technologies that that get artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networking type of capabilities, where they're the proving ground, if you will. They really are, just by nature of the amount of data, and we'll get to why that is here in a moment. But just because of the nature of how much data they need and all of that, they make a really good candidate for these types of technologies. Did I answer your question?
Thanks, Corey. I hadn't seen SIM show up anywhere in here, and I appreciate
And so, and for those of you who don't see or aren't familiar with the terminology, and actually, Clark, the only reason I avoid that is sometimes that, once again, I try to avoid jargon as much as possible. SIMs, or SIEM, stands for Security Information and Event Management. And it's actually, that in and of itself is an advancement of two previous technologies that existed. But SIMs are, as far as technology goes out there, they probably have the widest versatility and the most capability when it comes to security tools within an environment. So that is not to say that a firewall is not important, or that endpoint protection is not important, but SIMs do kind of a unique thing in the fact that they can see everything from end to end. They can see as much as you are willing to provide them information for, basically. And so that puts them in a position that when we're talking about things like coming up with behavioral analysis, and we're talking about orchestrating certain reactions, or certain types of things that we want to trip an alert or trip a quarantine or whatever the case may be, they make for an excellent candidate to be able to do that just by virtue of the way that they are designed. Anybody else have any questions about SIMs? Just as a side note, by the way, so basically there are two areas. Whenever anybody asks me like, hey, if you're going to spend money on an organization for security, what two areas would you most highly invest in? And there are two areas that I always suggest. One is having a really good SIM. And from an actual tool perspective, I think they're probably the most bang for your buck. And then the other part of that is security awareness training. And we'll get to that on why in just a second. But those two areas I always highly recommend. And as we were just discussing, so this correlation piece, right? So, something else neat that SIM and these other security tools that use AI, that are driven by AI, what they can do is they can also exponentially increase the effectiveness of the other security tools that are in our environment. So what I mean by that is you can have an endpoint protection, and when I say endpoint protection, that's really just kind of the modern term for what we would traditionally call antivirus, but includes a lot more little pieces, right? But it's what sits on a person's computer, an employee's computer, and is watching and protecting them. And so it can take information from that and it can feed back into this correlation piece. It can take information from any firewall that's out there, whether it be a virtual firewall or a physical firewall. It can take information and logs and data from what is allowed to pass and isn't allowed to pass, what's being blocked, even usage data. It can take that information and put that into the data correlation piece. If there are any people out there that have really great security budgets and they have some of these really high speed tools related to like packet inspection and things of that nature, or if you've got like Burp Suite, right, and you're doing all kinds of very in-depth analysis, or Splunk, right, and you're looking at a lot of like huge amounts of data and a lot of metadata related to those pieces of data, and all of that information can be pulled together and correlated by these engines within these SIMs, within these security tools. And like I said, traditionally speaking, we would always run into problems or limitations related to the amount of data that could be processed or correlated. So before the introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning, really, there was a lot of issue around like the bandwidth and the amount of resources that it would use, because it was much harder to determine what pieces of information were actually important and what pieces and areas that we needed to focus on, so that resources weren't being needlessly wasted. And that's where AI and ML have really, really exponentially improved these security tools, is by being able to get rid of the minutia, being able to get rid of the noise that is involved and make better use of the resources and the assets that we give them, so that they can much more accurately and much faster determine an analysis of things. And so it really is incredible, the capabilities and really the exponential increase in capability that artificial intelligence has granted to these tools. So then you ask, you think, well, if all of this stuff sounds fantastic, right? It sounds absolutely amazing. So if it's so amazing, why isn't everybody using it? And why are there still so many attacks? And why is there still so much money being lost due to data breaches? Well, that's because there's a few things that that a lot of organizations aren't aware of, and that it's not perfect, and that there are considerations that have to be taken, that have to be added into the the decision-making process for these tools that and the way we're going to utilize them. So the first is that they're data intensive. So I mentioned about how SIMs, are fantastic for this reason, because they have access to so much data out there. Well, the fact of the matter is that machine learning is just that. It's a machine learning the data, it's learning things about your environment. And that's not something that can be copied and pasted, right? Every environment is different. Every set of data is different. Now, certain things like indicators of compromise might be common between environments, but the way your environment looks, the way your people interact in your environment is going to be different, and that needs lots and lots of data in order to become good at being able to identify aberrant behavior. In general, a rule of thumb is that it needs 10 times the amount of data that it is expected to inspect and analyze. It needs that in a background data set to have learned from in order to be effective. What that equates to is what we see nowadays is most of the time it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months for artificially intelligent driven security tools to be efficient. So it takes time for them to learn what your environment looks like and to see what your people do and to see how data is moved around that environment and getting tuned, right, from the people who are able to tune those tools, which steps into the next piece, which is the talent around machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's expensive. The applications are expensive. The software, the back-end software for machine learning is expensive. It's a relatively young field, and there's a lot of the people that work in it are in high demand and are very highly paid. So being able to pull that talent in is pricey, and even if you're not directly contracting that that talent, you know, you're still in some form of fashion. You're kind of paying for it throughout the technology because the technology has to pay for itself eventually from these companies that develop it. So the talent is expensive. And most importantly, and probably most keenly, is that this is still only one piece of the puzzle. It's still one tool in the toolkit. It's not a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets in security. There's not a one size fits all. There's not one solution that fixes everything. So then is it worth it with, you know, if it has to take this long to do things and it could be potentially expensive, you know, is it worth it to have it inside the environment? Well, yeah, it very much is. And the reason is that even though it might be expensive, it's generally not as expensive as trying to do the same thing from a manual perspective. And what I mean by that is to think of it as a multiplier. It's a force multiplier. So whereas before you might have, in order to be able to do the same thing a SIM does, you might have had to have a team of 20 people where you're paying for all of their benefits and their salaries, right? So although a SIM can be pricey, it's probably not as pricey as hiring 20 people to try and do the same thing it's doing. So where, you know, you might have a singular team of people or a large team of people doing this thing, you can now have one or two or three or a small group of individuals who are now exponentially more effective at being able to handle the security of your organization, whereas before, like I said, it would take a lot more. So what does all of this mean? Well, it means that we, once again, getting back to this holistic approach to security, that, you know, artificial intelligence is fantastic. It can exponentially increase our capabilities. It has the ability to give us really a fighting chance and an edge on attackers. But remember that it's still just one layer. It's still just one piece of the overall solution of an organization. And most importantly is that it cannot replace the human element. It can't replace what they do and what they're capable of, but it can exponentially increase their individual capabilities. So keep that in mind. A lot of organizations, they tend to want to swing one way or the other. They'll go, well, I don't need to rely on technology, so they'll stay hyper-focused on the people, right? And then they're kind of retarding their efforts and really maybe spending a lot more in resources to try and do the same thing, where if they would bring in the right security tool, they could have that capability. But by that same token, I've also seen organizations come in and spend ridiculous amounts of money on a good SIM or other artificially intelligent driven security tools. They get it, they put it in their environment, they turn it on, and then they never touch it again. Well, guess what? it's not doing them any good because it's not been tuned. It's not necessarily been configured appropriately, and there's still not a human being there who's validating what that machine is doing, going, okay, well, yeah, it's effective, or no, it's giving us a bunch of false positives. We need to make these changes. So by that same token, it can't replace people. People still need to play a part for that. So in this approach, we have all of these different elements to holistic security, right? People, training, and awareness. And I put human sensors down here as a particular important element here, because I kind of notated this at the beginning, which is, we look at people as being either being risk, or that they can be security sensors. And what I mean by that is, and I kind of mentioned that, if I were to place my money into two areas, what would it be? SIMS and security awareness training. Well, security awareness training really, really can take what is normally a human risk and turn them into a human sensor. And even better is if we take that and we plug that into some of the capabilities that our SIMs have, right? The reporting structure to things. We can then monopolize on that effect of people being aware of what a phishing scam looks like, and what their computer acting in a certain way maybe looks like, and they can report that and utilize that once again in that correlation piece. We have the perimeter, we have our network, we have our endpoint, we have all these different elements. But the one thing is that up until recently, we've looked at each of these as individual security elements and really trying to bring them together into a holistic solution. And one of the best ways that we can do that is through artificially intelligent and machine learning based tools and capabilities, right? That's what can be the common thread that brings in that correlation piece, that provides that common thread amongst all of these things, that really allows us to have a much higher, much more effective capability around security, and being able to make sure that we do see the whole picture, and that we're not just getting one point of view, and that we don't have a single point of failure. So I had a question that popped up here about where we see this technology maturing over the next 1 to 5 years. I can tell you this. I can tell you that we actually work near. There are a lot of national labs. There's a lot of large companies. There are a lot of federal agencies that are spending a lot of time that are highly focused specifically on behavioral analytics. Right now, that's one of the biggest areas, is being able to more accurately target and define and identify differences in behavior, right? And part of the reason for that is that people can, as far as considering them to be a risk or a threat, I'm sure you all may have heard the terminology insider threat, and that is another consideration that has to be taken into security. And that can come in one of two forms. You have people who don't know any better, who maybe do something innocently because they don't realize that they're making a mistake. They don't realize when they click on that link in that email that it's probably going to end up badly. But you also have people who maybe are potentially doing things maliciously, right? Maybe they think they're going to be laid off, or maybe they're unhappy with their boss, or they're unhappy with their company, and they're going to try and steal stuff before they leave, or sabotage stuff before they leave. And if there's somebody who maybe works in IT or has a high level of access and authorization, I've seen a lot of organizations who were reliant on one IT guy, that one guy that had all the keys to the castle, that had all of the answers and all of the knowledge. And basically the relationship goes sour, and that individual just kind of maybe allows things to just kind of go awry, and then just walks away. And that organization doesn't have a clue. They don't have any technical staff. They don't have any capability around being able to get access to and knowing what's going on within their environment. It becomes a really, really big issue. And so, once again, making sure that, we can quickly zero in on, hey, this guy is, having some of this artificial intelligence and this alert stuff that's based on behavioral analytics is really key to, being able to identify this behavior and deal with those issues before they cause real damage. Another question we had from the audience is about how this can be implemented, without, the required expertise or the in-house skills. Well, luckily, like I said, especially with SIMs, a lot of us can make use of these technologies and these capabilities through a number of things that are out there that are available kind of off the shelf, and even more so with managed services. And I promise that is not just a shameless plug for Avertium, but in all reality, when you have the capability of having an organization be able to come in and deploy a SIM, but then teach it and tune it and make it highly tailored to your environment, you don't have to have any of the knowledgeable staff in-house. You don't have to have any of the expertise. And if you're dealing with a really good managed security services provider, they're going to allow you all the access, all the reporting, all the visibility that you need in order to have a high level of comfort that you're not fully trusting an organization with all of your security, but that you do have some sort of insight. It should be a two-way communication street. It should be a relationship from that basis. And so managed security services are an excellent way of being able to tap into these capabilities and this technology. And what we're seeing, there are actually trends now where, when I use the terminology SIM, even that is actually kind of dated. We actually now have full stacks kind of technology that is artificial intelligence driven, all the way from the endpoint to the firewall, and they're all connected. It includes deep packet inspection and all these cool technologies that are out there, behavioral analytics, all of that stuff, and it looks at your entire environment from one end to the other to give you really live, fast, aware of like 0-day type of vulnerabilities, doing managed vulnerability scans, patching, all of that stuff, and it's all brought in together in a stack of services that are, like I said, are machine learning based and artificial intelligence driven, that you can make use of through a managed security service, even if you don't have those skills in-house. Now, if you can't go that route, there are still some ways and some SIMs that you get out there that they're maybe not as capable, but they try to make themselves more user-friendly to give those capabilities out there. And most companies that you're familiar with, your Trend Micros, your McAfee's, your Symantec's of the world, if you're looking at SIMs, you're talking about like Alien Vault, or what is now AT&T Security Services, and Logarithm and Sentinel, and some of these that are out there. Those are all making use of those capabilities. Got another question here. With so many people working remotely, there are any additional changes to automation that companies should be prepared for? So I would say, actually, I think that the automation piece, and especially the capabilities around behavioral analysis and some of the rule sets that artificial intelligence and machine learning that are built into these security tools, I think have really well prepared us to work remotely in a lot of organizations, because they have the capability to place what are commonly referred to as agents on endpoints, right? And that allows them, once again, to get that kind of correlated data piece, even if they're not VPN'd in or connected to the corporate network. They still have an ability to pull in information from those endpoints and be able to provide some level of monitoring. And so I think that that those definitely give us a lot of capability around the remote workforce, if that answers your question. With that, I don't want to burn anybody else's time, but that's the last question that I saw pop up. Riley, I don't know if there's, if you want to jump in, or if we want to take more questions. I'm certainly available to do whatever you all prefer.
Yeah, let me, if anybody wants to unmute and has a question, you're welcome to ask it in real time instead of via the chat.
And for those of you who know me, I like to talk, so I don't have any problems with it.
You do it so well, Corey. Anyone? Well, we're so appreciative, Corey, of your expertise, and this was really an incredible presentation. So I greatly appreciate it. We're going to be putting this out on our YouTube, and it'll be up in a blog later today. We'll be providing it to the entire TAO community, so you can look for that online probably by tomorrow at mid-afternoon. And that's where you'll be able to see Corey's slides if you have want to reference them in the future. But we are so appreciative of your time, Corey, and Avertium for pulling this together for us. We really thank you for your continued support of the regional technology industry. And if you you see Corey's contact information up there, but if you want to connect with us at Tech Oregon, we can put you into contact directly with Corey and the team over there. So thank you again, everybody, for your time. And we hope everyone's staying safe out there, especially those who are located in Oregon. And we look forward to seeing you at other virtual events in the near future.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you all.